Sometimes Brandon was his own worst enemy. Yesterday, he was a would-be writer, a would-be artist, pacing his loft in search of inspiration. This morning, he got his wish. He had in the night written hundreds of pages of prose, drawn hundreds of sketches of strange creatures, and had zero recollection of doing it. Yesterday, he had drunk his flat dry of coffee, and now that thirst had led him to the crack of Java, a beast made of pure mocha, a monster he had himself named Cafindo in the witching hours. How did he get here? What crime had Brandon committed that was making his world collapse around him, literally erase itself? How had he gone from blackout to whiteout? And where was the mystery girl who had led him into this dark alley? True to form, her current whereabouts were unknown. Either way, the thought of being reduced to granules by this dark figment was a fate worse than Brandon could possibly imagine. Wait, surely escapism was the answer. If he was caught in his own brainstorm, couldn't he just devise his own exit? Brandon thought hard. Nothing. Oh, why was he cursed with writer's block when his own head was upon one? The solution hit him full in the face. It was one of Brandon's 109 pages of prose, dropped on the ground earlier and now flapping around his mush. He wasn't running out of ideas, he was running into them. Could this be his deus ex machina, a lazy plot device to dig him out of a hole? He wasn't fussy as long as it saved him. Brandon prayed the piece of paper would tell him what happened next. Suddenly, a piece of paper falling from the sky hits my face. An escape plan is written on it. That was what just happened. He needed what was going to happen next. It could not be more urgent. A moment ago, he would have killed for a coffee, and now he was about to be killed by coffee. A moment ago, he would have killed for a coffee, and now he was about to be killed by coffee. He literally just said that. He needed some new ideas. His livelihood depended on it. Cafindo loomed over him, and his body roared with the weight of the rich roasted caffeine Brandon so desperately craved. Ah, this is good. He quickly looked around and saw a straw on the ground. Like a knight facing a dragon, he pierced Cafindo's foot and drank him. Drink Cafindo with a straw? This idea plain sucked. He didn't want a coffee that bad, did he? The beast longs to devour his flesh, just as Brandon wishes for its hot, swirling form to be poured down his throat. More suggestions to drink Cafindo. He wasn't dying for coffee, not yet. Brandon had to think of a plan to stop this espresso abomination. Luckily, he found a milk float loaded with dozens of milk bottles, and Brandon knew if he wanted to stop a coffee monster, he would need a lot of milk. So he hijacked the float, drove it and aimed for the monster's mouth. This plan was not going to fly, let alone float. Brandon never had milk in his coffee. He'd rather die. This next idea was the one. This was it. The left side of Brandon's brain begged for an escape. The right side wondered if he was to be consumed by Cafindo, could he drink his way out? The right side was correct. This was how it would end. It was less Jonah and the whale, more Brandon and the Java. Brandon stopped running and wondered aloud. How much coffee could he intake? Sometimes Brandon's appetite surprised even him. He had looked the monster square in one of its 4 eyes and swallowed it whole. It turns out Brandon would have killed for a coffee, and now the beast resided in Brandon's tummy-tum. Brandon got into his car and drove far away. He saw prose on his windscreen, but what did it say? Brandon gets into his car, drives far away until he doesn't know what part of the city he's in anymore. These ideas were no help. They were driving him to distraction. Was he having a breakdown? Yes, he was. Brandon was at a crossroads, alone in a city rapidly disappearing. Which way was home? Charlotte Close, Henrietta Lane, Octavia Place. He didn't recognize any of these streets. Wait, Victoria Muse. Victoria, that was the name of his girl, wasn't it? Was she his muse? He needed to ask her. Are you Victoria? Are you my muse?
I'm whoever you want me to be.
I thought you were American.
I'm whatever you want me to be.
I'm having a bit of a breakdown, so I'm fine if you take the lead here.
I'm a figment of your imagination.
You are? Well, you're very pretty.
I thank you for that.
Thank me?
I am born of your mind, Brandon.
So
what do you want to do?
Well, I'm not like other men. I think about coffee every 7 seconds. But I'm not even in the mood for that right now.
What mood are you in?
Is there an emoticon for having a deep existential crisis?
Yes, it's just a 0.
Well, that's me. Brandon, spelt with a 0.
What do you want to do, Brandon, with a 0?
I want to go home.
But you never left.
I never left my loft.
You never lost.
You're not making sense.
You may think you're lost, but you're already home.
How is that possible?
If you cannot imagine, then I cannot be.
Don't go. You have to help me.
You have to help yourself, Brandon. Look into your eyes.
Look into my eyes. Someone had told him to do that at a party once when he was out of it. It hadn't ended well. How can you look into your own eyes? It was as silly a notion as being lost and yet already home. And yet, he knew those eyes. They weren't the windows to the soul, they were the windows to his loft. He never loft. There was his typewriter, his coat stand, his espresso machine. Sing Hosanna, he was already home. There was only one problem. He was already home. Sitting at his desk, Brandon saw Brandon. It was his mirror image, only not in the mirror. What was reflected a horrible truth. The other Brandon existed, and he did not. Was he a figment of his own imagination? It was a confusing idea to wrap his brain around, and a bit of a cliché too. There were dark twins in Stephen King books, in Charlie Kaufman's work, in Brian De Palma and David Lynch films. He'd even seen it in some comic book movie that escaped his memory. Whatever, Brandon would just tell Brandon that this was a silly idea. He didn't need to. The other Brandon seemed to agree. Brandon watched Brandon hit delete. And then it was all over. He was being erased, backspaced to death. Brandon was robbing him out. This was not how he wanted to go. He had to think fast, come up with another way out, but it was difficult to think fast when your mind is being wiped clean. Maybe Brandon was not the real Brandon. Maybe this anti-Brandon was in charge. Maybe he was his own worst enemy. Maybe someone, somewhere, could help.